Okay, so now we've done the 14 revision cards. All we need to do is we need to revise the timeline of migration and settlement so that we know the events and the dates off by heart. So first thing to do is nice simple line across your page. And then the first thing you would always do with any of the timelines you revise on the course is just get the dates correct that the course is split up into. So we'll do that now. The best way to do it is put the first date that starts the course far left of the timeline, circa 1835, and then the end date, which is circa 1895. So 60 years worth of history. Now remember, the way we learn the course is then we split those 60 years up into 3 parts. So the first significant date that we have is after 1835. We get to a date in the course which is circa 1862. Very significant date in the history of the American West there. And then the final date, which splits it then into the 3, is just here, and that's circa 1876. So always one line, start date, end date, and then those 2 other dates that split it into the 3 periods of time. So the next challenge is to try and place the 7 revision cards into that first period of time from circa 1835 to circa 1862. So I've got those revision cards just in front of me, and I'll just go through them with you. So if you were revising, you could use the video and check your own knowledge of them. Let's have a look at them. So we've got the establishment of the Oregon Trail, the 1837 economic crisis, card without a date, but it describes the problems on the Oregon Trail. Then the Donner Party migration of 1846, the Mormon migration of 1847, the gold rush that began in 1849, and then 1854, first time white settlers attempt to settle on the area called the Great Plains. Okay, so if we go back to the timeline, you can see I've got my 7 arrows in. So what we would do is we would start to write those events in. So do a couple for you, and then when we zoom ahead, they'll all be on there. So the first one, 1836. So that is the establishment of the Oregon Trail. Okay, and then 1837, you've got the economic crisis. Now you can carry on filling all of those in as you go so that the timeline is complete up to 1862. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's our first 7 cards from that first period of time. Then we're looking at another series of the revision cards that help us to understand what was happening then in the second period of time. Now, the significant point to remember here is that all of these cards are all about settlement now onto the plains, not California and Oregon, onto the plains. So here are these cards again, if we remember. Now, the first one, the American Civil War, actually starts just the year before that date of 1862, but we know that it's a circa date around that time. So 1861 to 1865, the American Civil War. Then, within the period of the Civil War, a year after it started, you have the Homestead Act and the Pacific Railroad Act. 1869, that transcontinental railroad was actually finished 7 years after the Pacific Railroad Act in 1869. Then a card again that doesn't have a date on because it starts to describe all the innovations and solutions that they were making to white settlement farming on the plains. And that goes on throughout that whole period and beyond. But finally, within that story, there was another act passed by the government, which was called the 1873 Timber Culture Act. So again, what you'd start to do is you start to place those events actually onto your timeline. Again, I'll place a couple on there, and then we'll head forward in the video and we'll look at the final period of time. So the first one would be placed here. So that starts in 1861 to 1865, and that is the American Civil War. And then significantly, as we said, 2 acts passed within 1862 during the time of the American Civil War. So the Homestead Act, which encouraged migration onto the plains, and the Pacific Railroad Act also as well. Okay, so now you can see those 5 events from the period 1862 to 1876, American Civil War, Homestead Act, Pacific Railroad Act, Transcontinental Railroad completed, solutions to white settlement farming, and the 1873 Timber Culture Act. So in the final period of time, we just have 2 events to learn that complete that timeline of migration and settlement. So those 2 cards just here. So if you remember in order, we have first of all the 1879 Exoduster movement and the rather peculiar but fascinating 1889 Oklahoma land rush. So we'll be able to put both of those events on there for you. So the first one just here, so 1879, and that was the Exoduster movement. So large number of freed black slaves making their way onto the plains state of Kansas. And then 1889, the Oklahoma land rush. So Oklahoma land rush. And some of you will be thinking as well there that although the first land rush took place in 1889, there are actually 7 of these events that took place up to the end of the course, the largest one taking place in 1893. So those are the types of facts that you could start to add in when you're revising the timeline itself in full. Now, when you become very confident with doing that timeline, one of the things that I would do is then I would take another colour and we can start to add in some more notes about what makes this story a little bit more distinctive in parts. To use one example, if we looked here at the Donner Party migration, the Mormon migration, and the gold rush, then it's very clear that what these are is they are representative of case studies of migration west. So they're quite a distinctive part to the story. So don't be afraid to grab another colour and then add in some other notes to those as you go. The Donner Party obviously was a case study for us in failure. The Mormon migration, a case study in success. And the gold rush actually brought a flood of young men, migrants towards California. So case studies, but also different as well within that. The other thing I would do, say for example, is from the event here of 1854 through the whole of this period now, then what we're actually talking about is we're talking about settlement that just takes place on the Great Plains. So it's well worth just adding in some other notes when you get slightly more confident about what was happening. And when you see the second question on the actual exam, you'll see why that would be quite useful. And we'll be looking at that second question fairly soon in our work.